This is the case of Hilary Lee Tyler, a young woman who hid her pregnancy from everyone around her. She gave birth in a Super 8 motel room and made a decision that would change her life forever. But this isn't just a story about what happened in that room. It's a story about the months of deception that led up to it, the investigation that unraveled the truth, and the legal battle that followed. A battle that would eventually reach the Iowa Supreme Court and set important precedents about expert testimony in criminal cases. Now, our story begins in 2010 in Iowa, where Hilary Lee Tyler and Rodney Cyphers began dating. Like many young couples, they were building a life together, navigating the ups and downs of a new relationship. But in early 2011, something had changed, something that Hilary wasn't ready to acknowledge even to herself. See, Rodney, he began to notice something different about his girlfriend. Hilary was exhibiting unmistakable signs of pregnancy. Her body was changing in ways that couldn't be ignored. And as any concerned partner would, Rodney confronted her directly. He asked her the obvious question, "Love, are you preggers?" But Hilary's answer was, "No, are you stupid?" And she didn't just deny it once, she created an entire explanation for what was happening to her body. Hilary told Rodney that she was suffering from a medical condition. Being stupid is not a condition that caused her to exhibit signs typically associated with pregnancy. Of course, this was a lie, but it was a lie she would maintain for months. And here's the thing, she was pregnant, and she knew it, but for reasons that we'll never know, she didn't reveal why. She told no one. Why do you think that is? I think because it wasn't Rodney's baby. Why hide it? And as the months passed, the signs became more and more obvious. Her body continued to change, her abdomen grew, she began wearing looser fitting clothing to hide what was becoming difficult to conceal. But still, she denied everything. When people asked, "Are you pregnant, love?" she stuck to her story about this medical condition. And perhaps most tellingly, she refused to allow Rodney to touch her abdomen. A small but significant detail that speaks to the lengths she went to maintain her secret. And think about that for a moment. Your girlfriend will not let you touch her midriff. And for her, imagine carrying a baby for months, watching your body transform, feeling the baby inside of you, and never once admitting it to anyone. I have kids myself. They're the most wonderful thing. This psychology of that deception must have been enormous. But Hilary maintained it day after day, week after week, month after month. And in the summer of 2011, life threw Hilary and Rodney a curveball. But perhaps, from Hilary's perspective, it was a good thing. You see, Rodney's employer assigned him to a job at a plant located in Fort Dodge, Iowa. This meant the couple would need to relocate temporarily. And at the end of August 2011, Hilary and Rodney moved to Colville, Iowa. This was a small town located approximately 10 miles south of Fort Dodge. They weren't moving into a house or an apartment. Instead, they set up residence in a fifth-wheel trailer in a trailer park. It was temporary housing for a temporary job assignment. But for Hilary, who is now in her third trimester, this move represented something else entirely. She was now in a new place, away from family and friends who might have noticed her condition. This was the perfect playground for her to hide her pregnancy. Again, why she would, I don't know, but it is what it is. She was away from people who might have asked too many questions. The clock was ticking. Hilary had to know that she couldn't hide her pregnancy much longer. The baby would come, whether she was ready to face that reality or not. And when it did, she would have to make a choice about what to do next. This moment came September 19th, 2011. Around 3 a.m., she began experiencing mild contractions. She was in labor. She didn't wake up Rodney. She didn't call for help. She didn't go to the hospital. Instead, she waited. How? I don't know. That shit is painful. Hiding contractions is impossible. Then at 6:30 a.m., as the contractions continued, she made a phone call to the Super 8 hotel in Fort Dodge. She spoke with the hotel manager and inquired about a room. The manager told her a room was available. 20 minutes later, she arrived at the hotel. She checked into the room 225, at 7 a.m. She was alone. She was in labor, but she had a plan. What exactly was the plan? We don't know. She occupied the room for nearly 10 hours. Most of that time, she was alone with her secret, alone with her pain, and alone with whatever thoughts were running through her mind. So around 12 o'clock that day, Hillary gave birth to a baby boy in the bathroom of room 225. She would later tell investigators that she gave birth in the bathtub. But what happened next is where this case becomes tragic and disturbing. See, according to Hillary's own statements to police, after the baby was born, she laid around for a little bit. She then cleaned the bathroom floor. She took the baby's body, placed it in a garbage can in the hotel room. That same garbage can is where she had a whole bunch of wipes with blood and dirt and whatever on there from this whole ordeal. The baby was wrapped in a white towel. She then gathered her belongings, and then around 5 p.m. she checked out of the room. Yeah, she gave birth, put the baby in the towel, and then left. When she went back home, Rodney was home, and we can only imagine what was going through Hillary's mind at that moment. She had just given birth, she had just left her baby's body in a hotel room garbage can, and now she was to face the man she'd been lying to for months. But there's another question. If Hillary's waking up around 3-4 a.m., she must have been making noises, contractions. Again, contractions, you don't stay silent. I don't think anyway. Rodney must be such a heavy sleeper that he did not notice, or Hillary's pain tolerance must be so high she kept it quiet. Either way, the logical question to ask when she gets home is, hey, you've been gone since 4, 5, 6 a.m. Where you been? It's a normal question, right? But she said nothing. She kept her secret. He didn't ask any questions. Shortly before 7 p.m., Rodney left to work a night shift. Hillary stayed alone in the trailer for the night. The next morning, Rodney returned to the trailer at 7 a.m. after working the night shift. Hillary was there when he arrived. The couple ate breakfast together and ran a few errands before returning to the trailer so that Rodney could sleep. Everything seemed normal. He had no idea what happened the day before. But Hillary was not done with room 225. Around 10 a.m., she returned to the hotel. When she arrived at the hotel, the manager informed her that there had been a cancellation and the same room was available. You see, another member of the hotel said, sorry, the room is not available, but now it was. And it does make you think, well, what if it wasn't available? Did she not think that far ahead when she left before? So then Hillary made a decision. She rented the room for the night again. According to her latest statements, she intended to return to the room later to clean it further. And think about what that means. She knew she left the evidence in the room. She knew she had left her baby's body in that room. She was planning to come back and clean it up after checking out. She could have very easily extended her stay before she left. What if that cancellation did not happen, and what if some Tom, Dick and Harry was in the room and found a baby in there? What the hell is this woman thinking? But then what happened was, at 11 a.m., a housekeeper did not know the room had been rebooked. According to the housekeeper, the room was still cancelled. So there was no customer. The housekeeping was not aware of the room's rental status. It showed as checkout rather than stayover. So the housekeepers entered the room, and what they found would haunt them forever. The carpet was saturated with blood. When they entered the bathroom, they discovered even more blood smeared on the floor. The housekeeper then found a hoodie coat in the room. When she picked it up, she realized the inside was saturated with blood. She also observed 2 discarded vodka bottles and $8 on the dresser by the TV. Money she initially thought was a tip, but it was the garbage can that would reveal the full horror. The housekeeper noticed a garbage can in the room containing what appeared to be a white towel bundled up among other trash. When she slid the garbage can across the room, she noticed, this is a bit heavier than normal. Something wasn't right. And in a panicked state, she left the room without emptying the garbage can. She then reported her findings to the hotel manager. The manager, with the housekeeper, returned to the room. Another housekeeper also entered because she could tell there was something going on in the room. I mean, all the blood and everything. So then the second housekeeper pulled the canned liner out of the garbage can. The group observed that the towel in the garbage can had blood on it, and the bottom of the garbage bag contained fluid and more blood. Although they didn't see the baby's body at that point, they were very concerned. The hotel manager made the call that would blow the case wide open. She called police. Police were then dispatched to the hotel. Upon arrival, the officer spoke with the hotel manager, who explained what the staff had observed. Accompanied by hotel staff, the officer entered the room. Over the next 20 to 50 minutes, several more officers arrived. They looked around, documenting what they saw. In addition to the blood, there appeared to be other bodily fluids present. Eventually, one of the officers moved the towel and the other items in the garbage can. Beneath these items, the policeman discovered the body of a newborn baby boy. The officers immediately could tell the baby was deceased, and according to their testimony, it did not appear that there was any need to render aid. The baby had been dead for some time. The officers secured the room and began the process of obtaining a search warrant. And after discovering the baby's body, Fort Dodge police contacted the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. This was now a potentially homicide investigation. Now, police from Fort Dodge began the task of identifying who had rented the room and where they could find that person. Through hotel records, they were able to identify Hillary Lee Tyler as the person who rented the room. They were able to locate her address, the trailer in Colville where she was living with Rodney. Now, around 2 p.m., just hours after the baby was discovered, Special Agent Michael Rokas and Special Agent Ray Fiedler and Jody Chancellor of the Dodge Police Department went to the trailer in Colville. The officers were dressed in plain clothes rather than police uniforms. They approached the trailer and knocked on the door. Hillary answered. Now, after making contact with Hillary, the officers told her they needed to speak with her. Detective Chancellor asked her if she needed any medical attention. She said no. He said again, "I want to have you go with this guy right here," pointing to the other agents. He said, "We need to get to the bottom of what's going on." He then asked Hillary, "Are you okay with that?" She said yes. Hillary then followed the officers to the vehicle and got in. Agent Rokas then entered the vehicle and began driving to the Fort Dodge police station. He did not read Hillary her rights. During the ride, he asked her 2 questions. Straight away he said, "Did the baby move?" She said no. He then said, "Did the baby cry?" She said no. These were Hillary's first statements to police about what happened. According to her, the baby had not moved and not cried. Why is that significant? Because she was claiming the baby was still born. And if the baby is still born, that's not a homicide. She could not be charged with murder. I don't know if this was something conscious that she was doing, or she was just saying no just to deny because she wasn't thinking straight, but it's an interesting observation. Hillary was escorted to an interview room at the police station. What followed was a 3-hour interrogation, but this interrogation would later be scrutinized by defense attorneys. Agent Rokas began the interview by asking Hillary if she needed medical attention. She said no. He then told her something important. Although she had ridden with him to the police station, she was free to leave. He also told her that if she wanted, he could drive her back to her trailer. And during the interview, the agents reminded Hillary multiple times, "You are not in custody and you could leave whenever you want." They also twice suggested Hillary to seek medical attention, of which she declined. Now, during the first half of the interview, the agents asked Hillary open-ended questions about her background and the events surrounding the baby's birth. During this period, Hillary maintained her original story. After the baby was born, he was silent, he did not move, and she immediately placed him in the garbage can. Now, this is consistent with what she had told Rokas in the car. The baby was stillborn or died immediately. She couldn't have taken the life because he was already dead. So then the agents decided to take a break. Before they left the room, they reminded her, "Look, you can leave if you want, and if you want medical attention, let us know." When the police returned, they began asking Hillary more pointed questions about the birth. They posited several hypothetical questions about what the autopsy would show. This is a common interrogation technique. The interrogator suggested that physical evidence would contradict her story, creating pressure for her to change her account. Whether this technique is ethical or constitutes coercion is a matter of ongoing debate, but she stated that after the baby was born, he then moved and cried. She said she placed him in the bathtub, turned the water on for the purpose of suffocating him. She was admitting the baby was born alive and that she had intentionally drowned him. Rokas then took another 30-minute break before returning. When he came back, he said, "Hillary, you're going to be charged today." At this point, more than 3 hours after Hillary had been contacted at the trailer, Rokas finally read her Miranda rights. Now, after waiving her Miranda rights by signing a written waiver form, Rokas interviewed Hillary with further statements. She confirmed her new version of events, that after the baby was born, he moved and cried, she placed him in the bathtub, she turned the water on, and the rest is history. So at the conclusion of the interview, the agents took Hillary to the hospital for medical treatment. She desperately needed and should have received it much earlier. Now, when she arrived at the hospital, Dr. Daniel Cole treated her. What he found was alarming and raised serious questions about the interrogation that had just taken place. See, according to Dr. Cole, he testified Hillary had undergone a tear from childbirth that required surgical repair. She had lost a large amount of blood and her blood pressure was high. She received a blood transfusion and several medications, including labetalol for high blood pressure, magnesium sulfate for high blood pressure in pregnancy, and codeine, which is a narcotic. Hillary was also suffering from a condition called preeclampsia, a serious pregnancy complication characterized by high blood pressure that can affect multiple organ systems. Now, preeclampsia can cause seizures, stroke, and even death if left untreated. But think about this. She had been interrogated for 3 hours with all these serious medical conditions and pains going on. She must have had a high pain tolerance. But also, she must have exhibited signs that she's in pain, which is why the police kept emphasizing, "Get your ass in the hospital." She had given birth less than 36 hours earlier without medical care. She lost a lot of blood, she had preeclampsia, and yet she had been questioned extensively before receiving treatment. Now, Dr. Cole did testify that she was alert and aware of her surroundings when he was treating her. However, he also testified that the medications could potentially affect her mental status. Specifically, he noted that Hillary was taking several medications to reduce the high blood pressure, and it was possible these medications could cause the blood pressure to drop, which could affect her mental state. He also testified that the codeine she was taking could affect a person's mental status if given in a high enough dose. This medical evidence would later become important. Hillary's attorneys would argue that her statements to police were not reliable because of her physical and mental state. But the police weren't done questioning her yet. The next day, Rokas and agent Larry Headland went to Hillary in the hospital to question her again. At the start of this interview, Hillary told the agents she was really out of it. However, she did remember speaking with Rokas the previous day and remember his name was Mike. She also knew that she was at the hospital. When the agents asked her if she would prefer they would come back later, she said, "No, you can talk to me now." And the agents told Hillary that if she got too upset or tired, they would stop. During this follow-up interview, Hillary again stated that after the baby was born, he moved and cried and she placed him in the bathtub. The move and cry is essential because it confirms the baby was alive. Meanwhile, the baby's body, the umbilical cord, and the placenta had been recovered from the hotel room. It was taken to the office of the state medical examiner, Dr. Jonathan Thompson. He was trained in forensic pathology. He performed an autopsy on the baby's body and a pathology examination on the body and related items. And after performing the autopsy, Dr. Thompson's initial opinions on both the cause and manner of the death were undetermined, based purely on the medical and scientific evidence. Let me reiterate, based on purely the science, he concluded, "I don't know how this happened." He could not determine how the baby died, or whether the death was a homicide, an accident, or natural causes. Now, this makes sense when you understand the medical realities of determining cause of death in newborn infants. Drowning is notoriously difficult to diagnose through autopsy alone, especially in newborns. The lungs of a newborn who drown may look very similar to the lungs of a stillborn baby, or a baby who died immediately after birth. But in his final report, Thompson changed his conclusions. He said the cause of death now was bathtub drowning, and the manner of death as homicide. So what changed? What made him change his mind? This is the central point of the case. The only reason he changed his mind is because he read the police report. Hillary mentioned that the baby was breathing and then she turned on the water. So it was purely based on Hillary's statements where, she was feeling pain and she wasn't thinking clearly, where he changed his opinion. Is this enough for his final report? To him, the mother claimed she had given birth the previous day in the motel room, then placed the infant in the bathtub and then filled it with water. The baby moved and cried. He watched Hillary's interrogation video, listened to her statements, and then made a conclusion. None of this was based on his own medical evidence. He used Hillary's police statements. So then, the state of Iowa charged Hillary Tyler. Regardless of what you think of her, is that fair? She was charged with murder in the first degree for the death of her baby. She entered a plea of not guilty. Now, prior to trial, Hillary's defense attorneys filed several important motions. 3 of these motions are particularly relevant to understand how this case unfolded. First, they filed a motion to suppress evidence obtained by police during the search of the room. They argued that the search violated Hillary's Fourth Amendment rights. No, it didn't, but they tried anyway. Second, they filed a motion to suppress Hillary's statements to police, arguing that the interrogations violated her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination because she was in custody and had not been read her Miranda rights. That's a fair point. Third, and most importantly for the ultimate outcome of this case, the first 2 motions were denied, but the third motion was to exclude Thompson's testimony, the autopsy report, because this said the manner of death was homicide. And again, Hillary is a muppet. She's an idiot. Why hide the pregnancy? I don't know. But I think she makes a good point with Thompson's testimony. Strictly by the law, you know? So, January 15th, 2013, Hillary's attorneys argued that Thompson should be prohibited from testifying because his opinions were not based on scientific or medical evidence, but rather on Hillary's statements. At the hearing, Hillary's attorney questioned Thompson about the foundation for his conclusion. The exchange was devastating to the prosecution's case. They asked the doctor, "Are your opinions strictly on medical or scientific evidence?" He was unable to give a conclusion as to whether or not this was a homicide. He said, "Just on the autopsy findings, no, this is not a homicide." Furthermore, the defense attorneys claimed, based just on the autopsy findings, he wouldn't be able to determine if this was drowning, specifically drowning. He said, "Yes, I wouldn't." So the defense claimed, based on his expertise and his medical background, the only conclusion he can come to is inconclusive, to which the doctor agreed. And that's a fair point. You went to a decade of medical school, you're the medical examiner for the state, yet you're relying on an interrogation video. That's not good enough, son. That's what the defense are saying. Thompson was essentially admitting that without Hillary's statements, he would have been unable to determine the cause of death. His medical and scientific findings were inconclusive. The attorneys pressed further. They said, hypothetically, if Hillary's statement to the police was that the baby was stillborn, your conclusion would have been, okay, yes, he was stillborn. It would have been a natural cause of death. To which he said, yeah, I probably would have classified it as stillbirth. And think about what this means. If Hillary has said, I don't know, cucumbers happened, he would have wrote down cucumbers. But because Hillary told the police the child drowned, Thompson concluded, the baby drowned. His opinion was entirely dependent on which version of Hillary's story he chose to believe. But the district court overruled Hillary's motion. The court noted that in Iowa, the courts are committed to a liberal rule on the admissions of expert testimony, and that Thompson's reliance on Hillary's statements was no different than a physician relying on a patient's history in reaching a diagnosis. That is a very fair point. It's a pretty good analogy, actually. Does it work? I don't know, but it adds another layer to this complicated case. It's not complicated. She should have just opened her mouth from the beginning and told Rodney what was going on. But here we are. However, this ruling allowed Thompson to testify regarding the cause and manner of death. So the trial, the actual trial, commenced February 11th, 2013. The central issue was the cause of the baby's death, specifically whether the baby was born alive and survived for a sufficient period for Hillary to drown him, or whether he was stillborn or died immediately after birth, such that Hillary could not have drowned him. The state presented testimony from Rodney, members of the hotel staff, and officers who investigated room 225, and the special agents who interviewed Hillary. The state also presented Hillary's interviews at both the police station and the hospital by way of video and audio recordings. I've requested those, by the way, so you'll see them when I get them. So, Thompson explained the autopsy he conducted. He testified he found fluid in the baby's lungs, but he also explained that the fluid was at least amniotic fluid, because amniotic fluid is partly composed of water. There was no scientific basis for determining whether some of the fluid was bath water. He testified that there were indications the baby may have taken a breath because the alveoli in the lungs were partial, although not entirely expanded. He then testified that based on his findings and given the history that baby Hillary cried and moved, Hillary probably took a few breaths. That's what he said in trial. Again, his opinion that the baby took breath was based on Hillary's statements. Thompson then said that the baby's cause of death was drowning and the manner of death was homicide. But then, on cross-examination, Hillary's defense attorney hammered into Thompson. They were like, "What are you talking about? This is all inconclusive." The attorney asked if there was an alternative explanation for the partial expanded alveoli in the baby's lungs. Thompson explained that the expanded alveoli would also be consistent with the production of methane gas by bacteria found in the body after death. The attorney also questioned Thompson about whether it was possible, based on the autopsy, that the baby was stillborn or died immediately after birth. Thompson agreed that there were several other possible causes of death he could not rule out based on the autopsy findings. He did agree it was possible the baby died either in the utero or immediately after birth. Hillary's defense was that her statements to police were not credible and it was the product of coercion. Her attorneys pointed out that during the first half of the interview at the police station, Hillary had denied the baby cried or moved after birth. It was only after being interviewed for a couple of hours that she changed her story. And that's interesting. If Thompson used her version of events where the baby was breathing, well, why didn't he use the first version of events where the baby was not breathing? You see what I mean? I'm not defending her. I'm just looking at it from a legal point of view. Again, this silly cow should have opened her gums at the very beginning and told Rodney what was going on. She would have saved herself from all of this. Now, as to her second interview at the hospital, they argued those statements were not credible due to her medicated and vulnerable state. Hillary also presented her own medical expert, a pathologist who testified that there was not sufficient information to determine the cause or manner of death. So the jury was faced with a choice: believe Hillary's confession and Dr. Thompson's opinion based on that confession, or believe the defense's argument that the confession was unreliable. Well, the jury found Hillary Lee Tyler guilty of the lesser offense of murder in the second degree. She was sentenced to 20 years. So Hillary appealed, and the case was transferred to the Iowa Court of Appeals. The appeals held that the district court had abused its discretion in allowing Thompson's testimony. They said that Thompson's reliance on Hillary's statements informing his opinions amounted to an improper comment on Hillary's credibility. The court also concluded that Thompson's words could not fairly be characterized as expert medical opinions because they were based on Hillary's statements rather than on scientific evidence. The Court of Appeals further determined that the error admission of his testimony and autopsy report was reversible error because Hillary's credibility was the central issue. So the court reversed the conviction and there was a new trial. The case then went to the Iowa Supreme Court. Now they had to decide whether the Court of Appeals was correct in excluding Dr. Thompson's testimony. The Supreme Court's decision is lengthy and complex, but the key holding is this: that Thompson's opinions and the cause of the manner of death were not sufficient because none of it was based on science. Thompson did admit that the opinions were based on basically what Hillary said, if not exclusively, but otherwise inconsistent and uncorroborated statements to police, as opposed to subjective, hypothesized medical findings. Thompson testified to the ultimate issues of fact, questions for the jury to determine. The Supreme Court explained that a medical examiner could certainly testify about the medical signs, whether autopsy findings were consistent with drowning, whether there were other possible causes of death, or whether they could rule out other possible causes. But Thompson's main argument again was based on her statements, and that the manner of death was not based on scientific knowledge, but rather on his decision to believe Hillary. So then, she got a new trial, and what happened to Hillary after the Supreme Court decision? Well, that's where the public record becomes less clear. The case was remanded for a new trial, but without Dr. Thompson's testimony, and with this, the prosecution's case was significantly weaker. The jury heard Hillary's statements to police in this new trial, but they didn't hear the medical examiner state that the baby was drowned and that the death was a homicide. They would instead hear that the medical evidence was inconclusive, that the baby could have been stillborn, could have died immediately after birth, or could have drowned, and that the medical evidence alone couldn't distinguish between the possibilities. This case raised so many questions. Why did Hillary hide her pregnancy? Was it fear, shame, denial, mental illness? We may never fully understand her mental state. What happened in that hotel room? Who knows? Did she intentionally drown her baby as she confessed, or was the baby stillborn? Again, who knows? The medical evidence did not answer the question, and that's precisely why the Supreme Court ruled that Thompson shouldn't have been allowed in the courtroom. Now, I did a little bit of digging. So, as I mentioned, she was sentenced to 20 years, but then they gave her a new trial. But in September of 2019, according to the Iowa Department of Corrections, she's been released and she's out on parole. So essentially, she got away with it. Now, there's an interesting argument here because she's guilty as fuck. I don't care what anyone says. Her intention in that moment, while giving birth, is to take that child's life. Even if the baby is stillborn, right? Your intention was for that baby to not live. So I don't know if that's a 20-year sentence, but to get away with it like she did is not fair. But from a legal standpoint, right? If you're going to base it on her testimony just after she's given birth by herself in a hotel room without an epidural or elliptical. I always get confused by those words. Epidural. Without an epidural, right? You ever seen a woman give birth without an epidural? It's so painful. That's how my daughter came. You ever seen a woman give birth with an epidural? It's a lot less painful. That's how my son came. So I know what this woman was going through. And I don't know if postpartum had already kicked in or whatever, but the 9 months prior would have weighed heavy on her. But again, communication is essential. Why did you hide it? And the only reason she would have hid it is because it wasn't Rodney's baby. You understand my theory? Anyway, comment, tell me what you think.